In the world of gymnastics, where grace and grit intertwine, lies a tale that uncovers the darker side of this glittering sport. This is the story of Elena Mukina, a name etched in history not just for her athletic prowess, but for a tragedy that revealed the immense pressures faced by young gymnasts. Elena Mukina, a star in the making. Born on June 1, 1960 in Moscow, Elena Mukina's journey in gymnastics began against a backdrop of personal tragedy. With her father abandoning the family when she was just 2, and her mother's untimely death in a fire 3 years later, Elena's childhood was marred by loss. Raised by her grandmother, she found solace in gymnastics, a refuge that offered an escape from her sorrows. Mukhina's talent in gymnastics was discovered at age 12. She stood out, not just for her natural ability, but for her unwavering dedication. Her life took a significant turn at 14 when she began training under the esteemed coach Mikhail Klimenko. This marked the beginning of her transformation into a world-class gymnast. Under Klimenko's guidance, Mukhina's regimen was nothing short of grueling. The training sessions were extensive and demanding, with little respite. Klimenko, known for his rigorous methods, pushed Mukhina to the brink of her physical and mental limits. This intense training, however, sculpted her into an extraordinary athlete, capable of executing movements that were deemed impossible for many of her peers. Her elegance and strength on the floor were a sight to behold, a harmonious blend of power and grace. Mukhina's ascent in Soviet gymnastics coincided with a period of crisis in the sport for the USSR. The 1976 Montreal Olympics had seen Romanian gymnast Nadia Comaneci attain unprecedented success, challenging the Soviet dominance in gymnastics. The Soviet regime, viewing sports success as a demonstration of national strength, turned their hopes to Mukhina. With the 1980 Moscow Olympics on the horizon, she was seen as the one who could reclaim Soviet pride on the global stage. The pressure to excel was immense. Klimenko, in his quest to ensure Mukhina's victory, started incorporating elements of men's gymnastics into her routines. These included exceptionally complex and risky maneuvers, further intensifying the challenges she faced. Mukhina's commitment to her sport and her country was unwavering, but the physical toll was evident. Her efforts started bearing fruit. In the 1977 European Championship in Prague, Mukhina clinched victories, surpassing Comaneci in some events. She won gold in the balance beam, floor exercise, and uneven bars, showcasing her versatility and mastery over multiple apparatuses. The following year, at the 1978 World Championships in Strasbourg, she achieved a significant feat, winning the all-around title and leading the Soviet team to gold, decisively putting Romania and Comaneci in second place. Despite these triumphs, Mukhina's time to savor her victories was short-lived. The countdown to the Moscow Olympics was on, and the pressure from the Soviet Gymnastics Federation and the government was mounting. Klimenko and Mukhina plunged into even more rigorous training, relentlessly pursuing perfection. Every routine was scrutinized, every move refined to an extraordinary level. It was during this period that Mukhina's fate took a tragic turn. The introduction of the Thomas Salto, a perilous move typically performed by male gymnasts, into her floor routine marked the beginning of a series of events that would eventually lead to her career-ending injury. The Thomas Salto required exceptional height and speed for safe execution, and the risks of serious injury were high. Despite the dangers, Mukhina was compelled to incorporate this element into her routine, a decision driven by the intense desire to win and the immense pressure to uphold national pride. Mukhina's dedication and resilience were unquestionable, but the human body has its limits. In late 1979, while preparing for the World Championships in the United States, she suffered a leg fracture and was sidelined for a significant period. This injury, however, did not dampen the Soviet government's expectations. The fear of losing to Romania, especially on home soil at the upcoming Olympics, led to increased pressure on Mukhina to return to training prematurely. The pressure cooker of elite gymnastics. In the high-stakes world of elite gymnastics, athletes like Elena Mukina experience pressures that are immense and multifaceted. It's a world where every leap and pirouette is not just a display of physical prowess, but also a battle against intense psychological and emotional challenges. Elite gymnastics, especially in regimes like the Soviet Union, was more than just a sport. It was a symbol of national pride and political prowess. Athletes were not just representing themselves or their team. They were carrying the weight of their entire country's reputation. For young gymnasts like Mukhina, this meant training from a very tender age, often sacrificing normal childhood experiences for the rigors of the gym. The training regimen for these young athletes was nothing short of brutal. Days began and ended in the gym with physical exercises that pushed their bodies to the very brink. Coaches, driven by a relentless pursuit of perfection, often disregarded the physical and emotional well-being of their trainees. In Mukhina's case, her coach, Mikhail Klemenko, was known for his rigorous training methods that bordered on the extreme. These young gymnasts underwent hours of strength training, flexibility exercises, and endless repetitions of complex routines. The physical toll was evident in their exhausted bodies, but perhaps more concerning was the psychological impact. The pressure to perform perfectly at every competition created an environment riddled with anxiety, stress, and fear of failure. Mukhina herself, in interviews, spoke of the immense pressure to live up to the expectations placed upon her, not just by her coach and team, but by her country. Injuries were a common occurrence, yet they were often ignored or downplayed. Painkillers and quick medical fixes were the norm, as the focus was always on getting the gymnast back on the floor as quickly as possible. For Mukhina, this meant returning to training before her body had fully recovered, setting the stage for her career-ending injury. The psychological toll was equally damaging. Many gymnasts developed mental blocks, a phenomenon where an athlete suddenly becomes unable to perform a skill they once did with ease. This is often the result of extreme stress and fear of injury. Mental health issues like depression and anxiety were, and continue to be, prevalent among elite gymnasts. The culture of silence and stoicism within the sport meant these issues were rarely acknowledged or addressed. The constant scrutiny and evaluation also played a significant role in shaping a gymnast's self-image and self-worth. Their value was often directly tied to their performance and medal count, leading to a fragile sense of self that hinged on their success in the sport. The fear of disappointing coaches, families, and their countries loomed large, creating an environment where nothing but perfection was acceptable. For Mukhina, the psychological pressure was compounded by the physical demands placed on her. The introduction of the Thomas salto into her routine, despite the inherent risks and her own apprehensions, was a clear indication of the extent to which winning was prioritized over the athlete's safety. This relentless push for more complex and dangerous routines reflected a broader issue in gymnastics where the spectacle and the scoring potential of routines often overshadowed the athlete's well-being. Mukhina's experience is not an isolated one. Stories of young gymnasts being pushed to their limits, both physically and mentally, are common in this sport. It's a reflection of a system that often values medals over the health and well-being of its athletes. The drive to produce champions, to stand atop podiums, and to raise national flags has often come at a high cost. The tragic turning point. The path leading to Elena Mukhina's catastrophic injury was paved with a series of fateful decisions and ignored warnings. It's a chilling narrative that underscores the harsh realities of elite gymnastics and the cost of pushing human limits for the sake of glory. As the 1980 Moscow Olympics approached, the pressure on Mukhina to perform at her peak was immense. The Soviet Union, eager to showcase its supremacy in gymnastics on the global stage, particularly on home soil, placed enormous expectations on her young shoulders. This period marked a significant escalation in the intensity of her training under coach Mikhail Klemenko. Klemenko, known for his uncompromising training methods, believed in pushing his athletes to the edge. For Mukhina, this meant incorporating more complex and dangerous elements into her routines, a strategy aimed at ensuring her competitive edge. One such element was the Thomas salto, a risky move typically performed by male gymnasts due to its high degree of difficulty and inherent danger. The salto required extraordinary skill and precision, demanding a perfect blend of speed, height, and rotation to execute safely. Mukhina, despite her exceptional talent, expressed concerns about the inclusion of this element in her routine. She knew the risks involved and the toll it could take on her body, which had already been pushed to its limits. Her instincts warned her of the dangers, but the culture within the sport at the time left little room for athletes to voice such concerns. The focus was on winning, and athletes were expected to comply without question. The first sign of impending tragedy came in 1979, a year before the Olympics. Mukhina sustained a serious leg injury while training. This injury was a clear signal that her body was struggling under the strain of her rigorous training regimen. Yet, the response to her injury was emblematic of the flawed approach prevalent in the sport. Rather than allowing her time to fully recover, the pressure to prepare for the Olympics led to a rushed rehabilitation process. Pain management and quick fixes were prioritized over long-term health considerations. Mukhina's return to training while still recovering from her injury was a critical and ill-fated decision. Her body, not yet fully healed, was vulnerable, but the expectations of her coach, the federation, and her country superseded the concerns for her safety. The Thomas Salto remained a part of her routine, despite the increased risk posed by her recent injury. The fateful day arrived just 2 weeks before the start of the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Mukhina was practicing her floor routine, which included the Thomas Salto. As she executed the move, her injured leg, still weak and not fully rehabilitated, failed to provide the necessary support. This failure in execution led to a catastrophic landing where Mukhina landed on her chin, causing a severe spinal injury. The impact of the fall was immediate and devastating. Mukhina suffered a broken neck, resulting in quadriplegia. In an instant, her promising career came to an abrupt end, and her life was changed forever. The dream of Olympic glory turned into a nightmare of pain and paralysis. The aftermath of the accident was shrouded in secrecy by the Soviet authorities. Initial reports downplayed the severity of her injuries, and it was only much later that the true extent of the damage was revealed. The tragedy of Elena Mukhina's injury highlighted the dangerous extremes to which athletes were pushed in the pursuit of victory. The aftermath and concealment. The aftermath of Elena Mukhina's tragic injury reveals a disconcerting narrative about the handling of athletes' welfare, particularly in the high-pressure environment of elite gymnastics under the Soviet regime. This chapter delves into the immediate and long-term responses to her injury, reflecting on the actions of the Soviet Gymnastics Federation and the government, and how these responses speak to the broader issues in the world of competitive sports. In the immediate wake of Mukhina's accident, the Soviet Gymnastics Federation and government officials faced a dilemma. The Moscow Olympics were mere weeks away, and the public revelation of Mukhina's severe injury could potentially cast a shadow over the event and, by extension, the Soviet Union's reputation in the international sports arena. In an attempt to control the narrative, the authorities initially downplayed the severity of her injury. The official statement claimed that Mukhina had suffered a minor injury and would be missing the Olympics solely as a precautionary measure. This misleading information concealed the truth of her condition: a catastrophic spinal injury resulting in permanent quadriplegia. The lack of transparency and the deliberate concealment of the facts were indicative of a system where image and prestige were prioritized over the well-being of individual athletes. The handling of Mukhina's injury also highlighted the lack of support systems for injured athletes. Following the incident, Mukhina received minimal assistance from the Gymnastics Federation or the government. The once celebrated athlete found herself largely abandoned by the system that had pushed her to her physical limits. This neglect reflects a broader issue in sports, where athletes are often treated as commodities, valuable only as long as they are capable of performing and winning. Mukhina's situation was further complicated by the political climate of the time. In the Soviet Union, where sports were used as a tool for political propaganda, admitting to the failure in protecting a top athlete like Mukhina was inconceivable. This led to a culture of secrecy and a lack of accountability within the sports administration. The true extent of her injury and the circumstances that led to it were obscured. leaving the public with a distorted understanding of the risks involved in elite gymnastics. As the years passed, the truth about Mukhina's condition slowly emerged, but the Soviet Gymnastics Federation continued to avoid taking responsibility. Instead, they shifted the blame onto Mukhina, suggesting that the injury was the result of her attempting a maneuver for which she was not prepared. This deflection of responsibility was not only unjust, but also symptomatic of a system that refused to acknowledge its role in prioritizing success over safety. The tragedy of Elena Mukhina's injury and the subsequent response by the authorities served as a catalyst for change in the world of gymnastics. It brought to light the need for stricter safety measures, better support for injured athletes, and a more transparent and accountable sports administration. Mukhina's story became a cautionary tale, highlighting the dangers of pushing athletes too far and the importance of listening to their concerns. In the years following Mukhina's injury, the International Gymnastics Federation, FIG, implemented several changes to enhance athlete safety. These included stricter guidelines on training and coaching practices, improved safety standards for equipment and competition routines, and a greater emphasis on the health and well-being of gymnasts. While these changes were a step in the right direction, the question remains whether they are sufficient to prevent a similar tragedy from occurring in the future. Broader implications and current perspectives. Elena Mukhina's tragic story is far from an isolated incident in the world of child athletics. It reflects a systemic issue prevalent in competitive sports that prioritize success over the well-being of young athletes. This chapter explores how Mukhina's experience parallels other similar cases and examines current attitudes towards the treatment and safety of young athletes. The pressure to excel in sports is not confined to gymnastics or to the Soviet era. It's a widespread phenomenon seen across various sports and countries. Young athletes often start training at a very early age, sacrificing normal childhood experiences for rigorous training schedules. This early specialization, coupled with intense physical and psychological pressure to perform, can lead to serious long-term consequences, both physically and mentally. Similar to Mukhina's experience, the story of American gymnast Carrie Strug at the 1996 Atlanta Olympics is another example. Strug performed her final vault despite having injured her ankle, a moment celebrated as heroic. However, it also raised questions about the immense pressure on young athletes to perform through pain and injury. In recent years, the conversation around the treatment of young athletes has gained significant momentum. High-profile cases like that of American gymnast Simone Biles, who openly discussed the mental health challenges she faced, have brought attention to the importance of prioritizing athletes. Well-being over medals. Biles' decision to withdraw from events at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics to focus on her mental health marked a significant shift in how athlete welfare is perceived in the highly competitive world of sports. The culture of coaching in child athletics has also come under scrutiny. Historically, many coaches in various sports have adopted a tough, authoritarian style, similar to Mukhina's coach, Mikhail Klemenko. However, there's a growing recognition of the need for a more balanced approach that nurtures and supports young athletes. Coaches are increasingly expected to be not just technical experts, but also capable of understanding and supporting the mental and emotional needs of their athletes. In gymnastics, the case of Larry Nassar, the former USA Gymnastics national team doctor convicted of sexually abusing young gymnasts, exposed a culture of abuse and silence within the sport. This scandal highlighted the need for robust safeguarding measures to protect young athletes from abuse and exploitation. It has prompted governing bodies in gymnastics and other sports to implement stricter policies for athlete safety and well-being. The impact of early and intense training on the physical development of young athletes is another area of concern. Studies have shown that excessive training can lead to overuse injuries, stunted growth, and long-term health issues. This has led to calls for more research and guidelines around safe training practices for children in sports. Furthermore, the psychological impact of high-level competition on young athletes is now a major focus. The pressure to win and fear of failure can lead to anxiety, depression, and burnout. Sports organizations and teams are increasingly recognizing the importance of providing mental health support to athletes, including access to sports psychologists and mental health resources. In response to these concerns, several sports federations and organizations have started to implement reforms. These include setting age limits for competition, reducing training hours, emphasizing athlete safety, and promoting a more holistic approach to athlete development that considers their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Elena Mukina's story, though decades old, continues to be relevant in today's sporting world. It serves as a powerful reminder of the potential consequences of prioritizing success over the safety and well-being of young athletes. Her experience has contributed to ongoing discussions and reforms aimed at creating a safer and more supportive environment for child athletes. Legacy and lessons learned. Elena Mukina's story, though marked by tragedy, has left an indelible impact on the world of gymnastics and the broader domain of child athletics. Her experience has served as a catalyst for change, prompting a reevaluation of practices in gymnastics and raising awareness about the well-being of young athletes. This chapter examines the legacy she left behind, the changes her story instigated, and the ongoing challenges that remain in the world of elite child athletes. Mukhina's career, characterized by remarkable talent overshadowed by a devastating injury, brought to light the extreme pressures and dangers associated with elite gymnastics. Her accident was a wake-up call for the gymnastics community, highlighting the need for a balance between pushing athletes to achieve and ensuring their safety. In the years following her injury, the International Gymnastics Federation, FIG, and other governing bodies implemented several important changes. These included stricter safety regulations, revised scoring systems to discourage overly risky elements, and improved training and coaching guidelines to prioritize athlete health. One of the significant changes was the banning of certain dangerous elements, like the Thomas Salto, which directly contributed to Mukhina's injury. This decision marked a crucial step in prioritizing the safety of gymnasts over spectacle and difficulty in routines. Additionally, there was an increased emphasis on creating a more supportive environment for athletes, recognizing the importance of mental health alongside physical health. However, despite these positive strides, challenges remain in the world of elite child athletes. The culture of winning at all costs still prevails in many sports, and young athletes often continue to face immense pressure to perform. The risk of injuries, both physical and psychological, remains a significant concern. The balance between pushing young athletes to excel and ensuring their well-being is a delicate one that requires constant attention and adjustment. Mukhina's story also brought attention to the role of coaches and sports organizations in the lives of young athletes. It highlighted the need for coaches to not only be skilled in technical training, but also to be aware of the physical and psychological limits of their athletes. This has led to a growing emphasis on coach education, focusing on understanding the developmental needs of young athletes and promoting a more holistic approach to coaching. In recent years, the voice of the athlete has gained more prominence in the governance of sports. Athletes are increasingly involved in decision-making processes, ensuring that their perspectives and welfare are considered. This shift towards greater athlete empowerment is a positive step in creating a safer and more equitable sporting environment. Moreover, Mukhina's experience has resonated beyond gymnastics, impacting other sports where young athletes face similar pressures. It has contributed to a broader conversation about child athlete welfare across the sporting world, leading to reforms in training practices, competition schedules, and athlete support systems. However, the journey towards ensuring the complete safety and well-being of child athletes is ongoing. The challenges of balancing intense training with health, education, and personal development continue to be a subject of debate and action. Organizations and individuals within the world of sports must remain vigilant and committed to learning from past mistakes, including those highlighted by Mukhina's story.